All right, welcome everyone. Today we have Stefan Heck. He is the founder and CEO of Nauto, a 1 billion AI-powered driver behavior learning platform that predicts and prevents high-risk events in the transportation ecosystem to help save human lives. Prior to Nauto, Dr. Heck was a consulting professor at the Precourt Institute for Energy at Stanford University. Previously, he was a senior partner at McKinsey, co-founding and leading the clean tech and sustainability practice. Dr. Heck earned a PhD in cognitive science from UCSD and a BS with honors in symbolic symbols from Stanford University. Welcome, Stefan. I appreciate you and your time.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
All right. So let's jump right away into what problem Nauto solves. So for those who have never heard of Nauto, who are its customers and what problem are you helping them solve?
Yeah, we're really here to prevent collisions and injuries. If you look broadly, if you're in the middle years of your life, it is the top risk you face. If you're a baby, infectious diseases are dangerous. As you get into your retirement years, the so-called lifestyle diseases, cancer, heart disease start to be the biggest risk. But for anybody between kind of 5 and 55, driving is the most dangerous thing you do. Most of that is people not paying attention. If you look at the federal statistics, a lot of the government focuses on not falling asleep and on speeding. We find that falling asleep is really only a problem if you drive certain types of profiles. If you drive in the middle of the night, of course, then sleepiness is a problem. Interestingly, if you do heavy manual labor, like we see it in landscaping fleets where they're exhausted when they get into the vehicle, drowsiness is a problem.
That makes a lot of sense.
But for the average consumer, drowsiness isn't really a problem, despite the fact that you may feel tired in the morning. People are actually pretty attentive when they first drive. And speeding is mostly an amplifier of damage that causes, you cause more harm, more loss and more injuries when you crash if you've been speeding. But we rarely see speeding by itself causing a collision. Now, there's an exception. If you're going, 90 or 100 miles an hour, then yes, speeding will cause a crash. But most of the speeding we see is what we all do, which is going just a little bit above the speed limit. It's technically illegal, but it's not actually very dangerous. So what Nauto does is we use AI to understand what people are doing while they're driving. And we put together 4 different things. What's happening outside? So is there a stop sign coming up? Are there other vehicles in front of you? Are there pedestrians crossing? We look at what the vehicle's doing. How fast are you going? What kind of maneuver? Also, what's the road surface like? Is it wet? Are you on gravel? And then really importantly, we look at what's the driver doing. Because it turns out that it's been known for dozens of years, 96% of all collisions are human error. So if you're not looking what the driver's doing, you have no idea whether the driver's responding appropriately to what's happening outside. So we look at not only is the driver paying attention, but are they falling asleep? Are they holding something in their hand? Are they looking at whatever the danger is that's outside? And then the last piece is we actually map locations. So we know certain locations are much higher risk than other locations. Interestingly, we didn't know this when I started Nauto, but it varies by a factor of 1,000. So one intersection will be 1,000 times riskier than another.
Wow, so that's crazy.
That's crazy.
And I guess that makes sense. Also, I've seen that type of stats when it comes to in cities, like certain areas also with violence, right? So there are segregated areas where this occurs as well within driving.
It really, it's a factor of how busy is the location, but it's also road design. There's some pretty badly designed locations and they should be fixed. Same thing, by the way, for drivers. Drivers vary even more. It's probably 100,000 factor difference between the best drivers and the worst drivers. We have some drivers in one of our package delivery fleets that have not had a collision in 45 years of driving. Wow. And at the other end, we see some drivers that have 3 collisions a year. And that's not even including teenagers who have many more collisions than that per year, the worst teenagers.
You mentioned fleets. So who are some of the customers?
So we started the business really serving large fleets directly. So these are people driving commercially, not necessarily big trucks. We have about 15% large trucks, but a lot of our vehicles are what are called light commercial vehicles. So it may be a delivery van, it might be a pickup truck that is a service technician, doing installation maintenance, whether it's on a telco network or an elevator or a landscaper, as I was saying earlier. So it's really the whole range from compacts all the way to large trucks. They are all driving for a fleet. Most of our customers initially were really large fleets. We're now working a lot with mid-sized fleets as well. So a couple hundred vehicles all the way to tens of thousands.
Got it. So the
In the
mid-size are a
last,
couple hundred.
yeah, that's right. And small fleets would be like a plumber that has, two pickups, right? And that we don't focus on yet. And we don't do consumer, although we do consumer drivers that are driving commercially. So a taxi driver or a ride-sharing driver, we would work with as well, because they're driving commercially in that case.
And we'll jump a bit deeper into the customer, but you bootstrapped this company. I'm always very fascinated about that. How did you decide to bootstrap versus venture, and when did you know it was, when did you know it was the time to start Nauto, and how did that occur?
Well, so I was looking at disruptive technologies when I was a professor at Stanford, and really looked broadly. We had about 30 different high learning curve technologies that improve quickly in cost, technologies that can make a difference to society, technologies that can make a difference to climate. And I had a number of PhD and other graduate students looking at those and trying to understand, how do they scale? What are the economics? And 5 students were focused on mobility. And it was very interesting because you could see there were cross connections between electrification, safety technologies, ride sharing. So I got really interested in what was happening there and became convinced pretty quickly that we're on the cusp of another industrial revolution type productivity shift. If you look back at the industrial revolution in the 17 and 1800s, there was about a 15 times productivity increase by deploying steam power initially, and then later oil, to supplant human physical labor. So we use machines to do what humans do. This productivity shift is different. This is basically using electrification and information, AI, computing, to automate and improve things that we do today, in this case, transportation. And if you look at what's happening in transportation, we can automate a lot of the driving. We can help humans get better about driving, which is what we do. We can also make your routing and your trips more efficient, saving both fuel and emissions. And so in an abstract sense, what Nauto is really doing is learning from the best human drivers to help the rest of the human drivers get really, really good. And we thought initially, if we beat the seatbelt, which is the biggest safety improvement in the last 100 years of automotive technology.
Still going strong.
It's still going strong. You definitely wear your seatbelt while driving. Don't ignore that. And it was about 20% reduction in injuries and fatalities. And deployed over about 10 years. Most people don't know it took a long time for the seatbelt to become established in the 50s and 60s. And initially, by the way, there was backlash. People said, why is the government telling me what to do? What do they have to say about wearing a seatbelt? And it's like, well, no, it's in your self-interest to wear a seatbelt. It's in everybody else's interest too. So
that's great, though. That's so, I mean, I remember going in my grandfather's Ford truck in Colombia, and that thing was a death machine. It was it didn't have a seatbelt.
Didn't have a seatbelt,
yeah. So it's I'm glad to see that there are individuals like yourself that are constantly pushing for for safety for the benefit of all of us. How, when you came across those stats, with students, and when you were what led you to say, okay, there's a correlation, this is clearly extremely important? What led you to go from that to, and I think I can do something about it?
Yeah, the idea of AI helping you drive was already out there, right? Given the DARPA challenge and the work that Carnegie Mellon had done, there was a team at Stanford also doing early autonomous driving prototypes. But a couple things happened in quick succession. One is I live a couple miles off campus, and I was biking to campus every day. And people would nearly run me over. And I started looking at what's causing these people to drive so badly. And what was interesting is it was almost all distractions. Morning coffee, cell phones, newspapers, kids in the back seat. And I started looking at, we were working with a lot of state and federal data on collisions. And it turns out federal data basically says everything's a speeding problem. And nobody had reported much distraction at that time. This is 10 years ago. And I started interviewing police chiefs. This is a very common founder thing, right? You get interested in a problem, you go start talking to experts.
Right.
And I went to the police chiefs and I said, how come everything says speeding, but when I'm biking around, it's all distraction? And they laughed. And I said, okay, that's got to be an interesting story that you laugh. And they said, Stefan, you got to understand, the cop shows up to an accident, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10 minutes after it's happened. And unless the person self-incriminates, we would never know that they were distracted, right? There has to be, they have to admit it, or there has to be a witness that happened to look in the car right before. Most people look at the collision after the big bang, right? When the smash has happened. Right. And of course, at that point, it's too late. The phone's gone flying or whatever. And so if the cop shows up and doesn't know what caused it, they put down excessive speed. Because otherwise, why would you have crashed? You must have been going too fast.
And they got to put something down.
And they got to put something down as why this accident happened. What's interesting is there's a big debate in the field that most people are not aware of between referring to these as accidents and collisions. So in ordinary English, people use those two terms interchangeably. But at Nauto, we're very focused on calling them collisions because they're not actually accidents. They're not random. They're preventable. And, they are moments where two vehicles or a vehicle and a person impact each other, but they're not random flukes. They are definitely detectable risks, preventable risks, and you can change your behavior to avoid collisions.
How did you then figure out where to even begin, right? So let's say you're like, okay, I found this disconnect. Even the cops understand that this is the way it is. They got to put something down, and that's how it works. Now, what do you do?
Yeah, so the intuition really was, look, if really distraction's causing all these collisions, why don't we turn the AI on the driver behavior side as well and understand when the driver isn't seeing the threat, either because they are distracted or just because I'm looking left and the pedestrian's coming in from the right. It can be innocent like that, right? And that was really powerful because no one had ever turned AI and deep learning towards the inside rather than towards the outside. And essentially, everybody working on AVs at that time treated driving as a physics problem. How do I move my 4,000-pound vehicle through the streets without hitting a pole, another vehicle, or another object? And it's kind of this classic 3D landscape. I got to find the free space.
Right.
We started looking at driving as a skill. And once you treat it that way, you realize there's highly skilled drivers and there's drivers that are still learning. And so essentially, instead of just treating it as a physics problem we're going to solve, we treat it as a coordination problem. There's multiple drivers that meet and they've got to do the right thing. And we treat it as a learning opportunity. So coming at it with a kind of growth mindset, what can you do and change about your own behavior that would reduce risks? And again, we use the seatbelt as a benchmark. In hindsight, the seatbelt turned out to be the wrong benchmark because if you change your driving skill, you can go way beyond the seatbelt. We typically get not just 20% loss reduction, but 60%. And if you really work on it, you can get a whole order of magnitude better, which is 90% reduction in collisions. And so those are incredible results that have never really been achieved. And interestingly, what we've proven over the last 8 years is human drivers can get to be as good as the best AVs. The best human drivers are already that good, but we can take the average human driver there as well.
How did you go about collecting this data, right? So you're talking about the driver and this and that. How do you do that? And then how do you then figure out who's that first fleet to go after and how do you convince them?
Yeah. Interesting. Three stages. The first one is, you just got to get some data. And so I called up all my friends all over the world. During my McKinsey time, I'd worked, in something like 30 countries. And I said, hey, if I send you a phone for free, would you drive with it and it'll just upload data on driving? So we start to get samples of good driving and bad driving. And it didn't do anything for them, right? This was a pure favor.
I
I
was gonna say
called and
personal favors.
personal favor. So you have to, reach out to your network. And we wound up having phones in 35 cities all around the world, everything from, desert in the Middle East, dense Asian cities, snowy Michigan, all over the place. And we wound up getting sample data of good and bad driving. So I'm still eternally grateful to all the friends that helped us bootstrap, literally.
How long did they do that for?
Probably a better part of a year.
Oh my God, you have some really good friends. I
Yeah,
got
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Always be nice to your friends. Lesson one.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Life crosses in all kinds of unexpected ways. So, and then to come back to your question about fleets, we looked at local fleets. We had, one of our first employees had I think it was a cousin who did fuel delivery. So we had a truck fleet. I spoke to pretty much every Uber driver I ever took. I said, would you drive with one of these? And so that was our first set of customers. I had our very first customer actually was Al's limo service, who I had,
Good old Al.
was a shuttle to the airport, and he was big on safety. He was a very sharp guy, an engineer by training, who had started this limousine service well before there was Uber. And he would do airport rides, the kind that you pre-scheduled in the old days by phone.
Yeah.
And he realized very quickly that, as his business grew, he would hire drivers, but he had no idea whether they were good or not. And so he loved this technology, gave us a lot of feedback. So those were, little entrepreneurs that basically were willing to take a risk on a new technology.
How long did it take you to sign it? Like for Al, was that fairly quickly? I mean, it looked like the first thing you were doing, aside from one, getting the data so you can actually have an algorithm and intelligence from this type of driving, but two, talking to your network, a cousin and Al, you came across Al. How long did it take to sign that first customer from when you said we're ready, like we have something and we need a customer? What did that look like?
Well, the collecting data was just asking for a favor. Our first dozen deployments were free, and so it only took a day or two. In many cases, it was one discussion, and they said, "Great, I'll try this out," because we weren't charging it. So we ran for about a year collecting data, and almost a second year basically running a service for free at that point. We didn't charge people yet. And only in the beginning of the third year did we start charging commercially for devices. And so even then, we were mostly working with passenger transport fleets that are family businesses, paratransit, taxi fleets. And so decision was pretty quick. You talk to the owner and he says, good, I'm willing to try it. Sometimes they'd say, hey, give me 10 first and I'll pay you for those. And then if I like it, I'll scale up to the other 300 vehicles in my fleet. That was pretty typical. And it was really at the end of the third year that we went after our primary target, which is enterprise fleet customers. And the reason we chose that is large commercial fleets, you get thousands of vehicles in one decision. And they all drive, 8 to 10 hours a day. So for an AI company, driving a lot of miles is really critical. You learn faster. Yep. So that's where we focus there, always with a view of, look, one day we're going to work with insurance companies and car companies, which we are now. 8 years in, it's not just fleets as customers anymore. It's also insurance companies that are providing this to their customers, protecting their end customers, and auto and truck makers that are building, Nauto's technology in and selling it along with the car.
When you started for free with those early adopters, was there a particular moment where you switched, or you said, all right, now we're charging for it? And how did you go about, was there a big loss when you kind of turned the tap on in terms of converting those that were free users to paid users? And did you come across any particular barriers from that?
So we did it around a device generation transition, which is an easy way. It's hard to go up in price for the same product that people have always had. So we
Right.
went from what we call Nauto 1 to Nauto 2, very complicated branding. Uh, and with the Nauto 2 transition, we started charging people. And we
Did you see
also,
a big loss at first? Was it
not
like,
really,
oh, I don't
everybody,
see it, or mhm.
I think we lost two out of the original dozen, but the rest all converted and started paying for it. At that point, they'd seen the value.
Hmm.
They'd had collisions, and they saw the value of having warnings. If you have to remember that our first product version didn't yet have the full ability to detect all the risks that we have today.
It
Today
wasn't
we
the rocket ship. You
no, so
had
today we see 90% of risks, and we're preventing a huge number of collisions. We think over the life of Nauto, we helped customers prevent about 30,000 collisions, which is a lot.
that's
Um,
incredible.
yeah, and so now it's super compelling. Back then, we started at a modest price point, about $20 per month per vehicle. In the meantime, we charge about $500 per year, so it's significantly more valuable. But the payback period has actually shortened in that time frame because we used to have about 8-9 months payback. Now we typically have about 4 months payback, so it's gotten a lot better for the customer. It's a fantastic deal now.
I love that you mentioned that, because pricing is, especially when you're starting out something and testing an idea for the first time, it's almost a forethought, and it shouldn't be. So in your case, it was a freemium model, and they had it for free, and after a certain amount of time, you released the Nauto 2, and if they want to pay for it, they pay for it. Did that, and you mentioned $25 per car per
Per
month,
vehicle per month, yeah,
per
that's right.
vehicle per month. Is that something, and now you said that it's more of an annual thing now. Did it drastically change from the get-go, that pricing strategy? Did it evolve into something completely different, or it's pretty similar from that early stage?
So we spent a long time debating what's the right model, and we've pretty much kept the same model. There's really two parts. One is, what does it scale with, right? So classic IT solutions scale with the seat or the named user. We looked at, do we scale with drivers? Because there's more drivers than there are vehicles. But we thought it's pretty complicated, like fleets, different drivers drive different vehicles. So we felt the easiest was to charge per vehicle. And we started with per month because I made it small bites. Now it's much easier. We just charge per year, like most SaaS companies, right? We're a software as a service subscription model, essentially. You pay per vehicle per year. The other part of it is, okay, so where do you set the price level? And for us, that was pretty simple too. We said, what's the amount we're going to save customers in avoided injuries, collisions, insurance bills, et cetera? And we want to make sure, we get a small piece of that, but they keep the majority. So typically we get about 20% of the value that we create, which is a great deal for customers. It's a good way to think about it, right? I want to create a lot more value than I'm charging. I think this is something a lot of technology providers get wrong, where, they try to keep the lion's share of the value, but then you're not getting happy customers that talk to other people, how great this is. And so.
Did that value proposition evolve? So the evolution of the pricing, great. The value proposition, when you're first getting those fleets, did you get it wrong the first time, where you assumed that they cared more about this particular thing that you were describing, right? Like, I guess, money that you would be saving them versus something else, or were you right on point on the things that they really cared about?
So I think in terms of what they cared about, we were right. People care about avoiding collisions and saving lives. I think what we underestimated, and this is an important learning I want to share with all future founders, is think about the buying process and the buyer, not just what the value is you're offering. Because I think in terms of the value we offer, it's super compelling, right? Who doesn't want to avoid collisions and save lives and save money? But the challenge you get into a large enterprise fleet, interestingly, the roles are split up. And unlike, a CRM solution you sell to the VP of marketing or the EVP of marketing, we don't have this kind of singular buyer. Because when we go into an organization, you have the safety organization, which cares about drivers, driver training, safety practices. you typically have a separate organization that manages the vehicle assets. So they buy vehicles and they buy vehicle technologies, but they don't know anything about how the vehicles are operated, right? They're just buying tech. And then interestingly, in these large fleets, this may not be well known, so I'll explain for a moment. Large fleets are self-insured in the US, which means instead of paying an insurance company like we do as consumers, they carry the risk on their own balance sheet. So when they have a collision, they pay out of pocket.
Whoa.
Which is good for us because whatever collisions we avoid is straight profit to the bottom line, right? We save the money very, very directly. And you don't have to do a complicated three-way deal with an insurance company. It's straight out of their profit. But the problem is that risk ownership is in yet another function, usually called risk management. And then this I didn't know when I started Nauto. I should have done more homework on this in hindsight. You know, safety reports to HR. The vehicle asset team usually reports to operations or engineering. It's a different function. And then the risk team reports to finance. So in order to sign a deal, you got to get all three of these folks to the same table and say, look, you're going to see the benefit in the drivers. You're going to see the benefit in fewer crashed and total cars that you got to replace. And you're going to see the benefit in reduced losses. And you kind of have to build the business case across three functions, which is definitely more complex.
I love that. Does it matter the priority in which department you speak to first? Have you noticed like a correlation between that, or is it whoever you get to first within each one of those departments, that's already a foot in the organization?
So, you know, this is hard to do, but not really a secret. It's best if you start at the top, right? Our best deals have been we've gotten a CEO or CFO or a SVP of operations excited and interested. Those deals work best because they can look across and bring these teams together. If you're starting kind of bottoms up, you know, the most eager team to take the call at the beginning, if you're working your way into an organization, is the safety team, because their charter is literally be safe, reduce collisions.
Right. They're looking for more things.
They're looking for
might
safety.
be out there.
Yeah. The problem is, first of all, safety teams generally have small budgets. This is, you know, if you talk to anybody who sells recruiting solutions or other things that get bought by HR departments, they don't have a big budget generally. And so you can do a pilot very quickly with a safety team, but it's hard to get a big deployment. The vehicle team, you know, buys a lot of technology. And in fact, you know, compared to a typical commercial vehicle is between $50,000 and $100,000. So they're spending, you know, 100 grand a piece, no problem. And, you know, our solution is less than $1,000. So $1,000 on your $70,000 vehicle is really rounding error. So they have the budget, but they don't have any mandate that says, you know, you get rewarded for buying a safer vehicle, right? They're usually incented to buy the vehicle that meets the spec and is cheapest within that envelope. So you have to do a lot of education to explain why, you know, hey, if you buy this vehicle with this extra safety technology, yeah, you'll pay, you know, $500 or $1,000 more upfront, but you'll more than make back that. You'll save about $3,000-4,000 per year in collision and liability damage. So it's a huge return, but it shows up, you know, after you drive it.
How do you go talking about customer feedback, which is extremely important? How did you go about gathering that type of feedback and incorporating that into the product development process?
Well, as a founder, you really have to be out there in the field talking to customers. That's where you learn. And, you know, you've got to spend time, sit down. What do they do? What tools are they using? What's really their problem? Not just what did they tell you is their problem, but you got to observe. You know, I spent many hours sitting in the taxi dispatch center, listening to them, taking calls, understanding vehicles coming and going. How do they figure out what went wrong? And what tools they use. And, you know, sometimes they'd have a dispatch tool on one computer, and they turn around and use a different computer to look up traffic on, you know, Google Maps. And those were some of the early insights of, look, if you can have one visualization that shows you where your vehicles are, where they're going, what's the traffic situation, where's the collision, that would be really, really helpful. That's where we began. And then as you go into large enterprises, you know, they have existing systems. So you got to integrate with their, you know, dispatch system, their workflow management system. They may have a collision reporting system that you got to tie into. So I think it's really important as the founder that you've got to talk to customers, and then you got to bring that back and sit with your product team and say, okay, how do we, out of all the things we heard, how do we learn what is critical?
Do you
And
still do that now? You're a lot of your time you're dedicating it to that customer feedback, or now in the phase of your company, like where's your time split? Where are you placing your responsibilities as a founder and CEO?
yeah, I mean, I have a very top-notch product team right now that does most of that. They go out and spend time with customers and understand other tools, workflows, how does it integrate. I still get involved in three different ways. The first one is, twice a year we sort of take a broad look back and strategically think about how can we shape the landscape. We really see ourselves as in service of the whole field. We want everybody's collisions to go down, not just our direct customers. And so that's more a broad reflection. Sometimes it takes the form of a workshop. Sometimes we have big strategic debates. Sometimes I write a quick 2-page memo that says, look, here's something we should be looking at as a thought starter to get debate going. The second is with our very largest customers, I spend time because they're very complex organizations. So you need to understand, what are the different functions doing? Many of our customers are Fortune 100 companies. So you've got holding companies with different divisions. And so I spend time there making sure we get to know all the stakeholders. And then the third, and this I actually find really fun, is first of a kind customers. So when we go into a new vertical, say, or a new country, I still spend time personally on the ground with our sales and our product team to get into those dialogues and ask questions. A lot of my value at this point is, I've seen a lot of different use cases and fleets, ask the right 2 or 3 questions. Why do you do this? Or why is this different? This doesn't match what I've seen before. What made you do it this way? And that often is revelatory. And give you an example. When we went from large fleets into mid-sized fleets, suddenly, you have insurance involved. And so it's not the same value proposition because what the fleet will save directly is just the deductible. And unless their insurance company gives them an incentive or a premium discount or subsidizes their safety technology, they really don't get the same return. The other thing you find is in these mid-sized fleets, the owner or the manager will also be a driver. So you go from a workstation behind a desktop to they're trying to manage their fleet on their iPad or phone while they're also making deliveries or service calls. So very different set of use cases suddenly.
What at this stage works for you? Is it word of mouth when it comes to customer acquisition? Is it mostly word of mouth, or are you building thought leadership in other ways? Like what channels work best for you right now?
Yeah, very much all of the above. We do a lot of thought leadership, talking about safety, educating people. Definitely a lot of word of mouth of references. Also, people move. You see, particularly safety teams share a lot of best practices with each other. There's and this is something I really love. There's a value in the transportation industry that you help each other around safety, right? It's not to your benefit to have somebody else get in collisions because, by the way, odds are they'll sooner or later hit your vehicle too.
Right.
And so there's very much this idea of we're all sharing best ideas and best practices together. So we have a lot of references, a lot of individuals moving as they change in their career path. They worked with us in one fleet, now they go to another one. We do a lot of introductions through industry associations. Some of them host trade shows where you're physically together. Sometimes just through CEO or CFO peer connections. So they'll introduce us at the executive or board level. And we do online as well, but mostly through partners. We don't really do the classic consumer, spam email. We found that this is still an industry where people talk to each other. So word of mouth or meeting each other at a trade show is very important.
I'm glad you said trade shows. For events, when it comes to resources that you allocate to your marketing team or even sales team, out of all the things that you mentioned, if we were to break it down into like a priority of what works for you, events fall pretty high up there for you that within your world, within your industry, or or not really, or it kind of is a blend of everything, obviously, that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think if you said overall go to market as a whole, it's still mostly direct sales. We call people up when we give them a demo and we show what we can do,
Mm,
or word of mouth from introduction from another fleet. Now, within marketing, yes, we spend more on events than we do on kind of SEO or web leads. Uh, Particularly because we're so focused on enterprise fleets. They don't tend to just go on the web and buy something, the way a consumer would. Uh,
right. And
and
that
and
thought leadership that you spoke about, when you're talking about safety, you're highlighting. I mean, in your space, you literally have access to the most intelligent data out there of safety. I mean, I'm guessing your white reports are, very popular to get at, people get their hands on. Is that a competitive advantage for you, that you do have access to all this data? Do you do things with that data aside from obviously helping internally those companies? Is there something else you can do with that data? Are there maybe even public entities that this might also make sense for?
Yeah, so we do a lot with the data within the fleet, for privacy and competitive reasons. Obviously, we don't share directly where one fleet drives with anybody else. That's really just for them.
Right.
We do share aggregate anonymous insights with everybody. So, for example, that when you're driving with your mobile phone and you're looking down at your phone while you're driving around, that's 23 times riskier than normal driving. So we share a lot of these kind of safety insights.
23 times
Yes.
riskier.
Yes.
Wow.
And then we look a lot at combination situations. It's one of the things that's unique about Nauto, where you have a pedestrian crossing and you're looking at your phone. And what a lot of people are surprised by is that the risk doesn't add; it actually grows exponentially. So pedestrian crossing is 7 times riskier than if there's no pedestrian on the street. A mobile phone is 23 times riskier. You'd expect that, okay, the combination would be 30 times riskier. Turns out it's 2,500 times riskier.
Wow.
So don't look at your phone if there's pedestrians around ever.
Ever.
Pretty clear. Those are the kinds of insights we share. You mentioned, are there other organizations or government
Yeah,
stakeholders?
that you can sell this
Yeah.
aggregate data to, that is super valuable.
We would love to give it for free to the government. Unfortunately, most of our government doesn't really look for data. It's somehow policy doesn't seem to get informed by data enough. And so, we've tried over the years to engage the DMV, engage the Department of Transportation, again, offering to share. We have anonymized aggregate insights around safety. The biggest thing would be if you look at our federal government, they're still very focused on speeding as the number one problem. And so I encourage them to talk to all these police chiefs who know that actually distraction is a much bigger problem. And we should be having a national campaign, just like we do against smoking. We should have a national campaign against distracted driving. That by itself, we think that's about 25,000 of the 40,000 people that die every year on our roads.
Wow.
So if you want to solve a big problem, solve distraction. Don't focus on speeding. Speeding is, it's not to say that speeding isn't a problem, but speeding is a much smaller problem.
That makes complete sense. I mean, you're talking about the core of a problem. Whether someone goes fast, it's not by itself something bad. It's where they're pointing that car to, and it should they be going fast in that area where they completely were not oblivious to where they were.
I mean, I'll tell you, we do see crashes that are caused by speeding, but they're very rare, right? I'll give you 2 examples. If you speed while you're on a gravel road that has tight turns, yes, then speeding will actually cause a crash, because on gravel, your traction's low. If it has tight turns and you're speeding, now you lose control. Same thing in snow. Most people, interestingly, actually drive slower in snow, which is the right thing to do. And if you do that, you're perfectly safe in snow as well. But if you're on an icy road and you're speeding, same thing. You start losing control and you run off the road. But for your ordinary driving in a city where you're not in a snowstorm or on a highway where the weather's fine, you're not really at risk from again, I'm talking about speeding by
Right.
10 miles per hour. I'm not thinking about going 95 in the 35 zone. That would be crazy.
I only have two more questions for you here. One is in regards to partnerships. That's very big for many of us. And I know that you recently, I don't know how recent this is, but you just had a partnership, you announced a partnership with Stellantis.
That's right.
One of the world's leading automakers and mobility providers. How, like, when it comes to partnerships, why did this make sense? Had this already been one that has this been one of the first partnerships at this scale, or what are your thoughts about partnerships for helping your end product get to where it needs to?
So my belief is that partnerships are essential. As a startup, you're a small company. There's a lot of much bigger fish in the sea. And so working with others to get your technology deployed, to get it integrated is really, really critical. And they can be channel partnerships. We work with leasing companies, insurance companies. They can be, technology integration partnerships, like with automakers. Stellantis is a great example. They are really hard. Working with big companies for a startup is a big challenge. Understanding how their organization works, understanding how to fit into their priorities. It's almost impossible for you as a startup company to change a big company's priorities. You have to figure out where do you already fit, and then you can offer something innovative. For us, we've have been working on partnerships with auto and truck makers from the very beginning, going all the way back to 2015. We took our Series A investment about a year and a half into Nauto's life. We already took strategic investments from Toyota, GM, and BMW because we knew we wanted to work with automakers and ultimately integrate this technology in, which was a very contrarian point of view at the time, actually, because a lot of the companies in that area, their view was, hey, these auto companies are all dinosaurs, the startups are going to wipe them out. I knew enough from my McKinsey time about how auto production works that it's a very complicated enterprise with deep expertise, lots of resources. And while startups certainly are faster at innovating software, and I think that's a huge advantage in startups, getting to really large scale, massive deployments, automakers are far more sophisticated at. How do you ship millions of vehicles? And so we set a goal from the very beginning. We want to work with automakers and truck makers. We want to integrate our technology in. It has taken many, many years because you have to prove yourself and get to scale. And the fact that we started in the aftermarket and have great results that we can show and examples of customers already buying this. And we get attention from the automakers because we say, look, here's our top 10 fleets, right? These are all companies that and sell to and that buy millions of vehicles. Now they're interested. But it takes ongoing investment. In big companies, people turn over, change roles. So you have to really build a good set of stakeholder relationships. And you have to be realistic. And I think this is, in hindsight, I was not always realistic. I thought this would go a lot faster. That big companies do move slowly. They do a lot of vetting. They really want to make the right decision. They're not as comfortable as startups are to say, well, let's do a quick experiment and try something. They want to kind of plot out how that will work. Stellantis specifically, by the way, has been an incredible partner. They came out of the merger of Ram and Fiat, Chrysler, Peugeot. And so what you have is very different companies with very different cultures all coming together under a new CEO and a fantastic leadership team. And they are not only driving, let's bring the best of that together, but let's reinvent what the car is. So realizing that, the old notion of a car was really built around an internal combustion engine, and your core expertise was how to build great engines. That's different today. Your car is built around batteries and built around software. And so innovating what that means, they've moved for an automaker incredibly quickly at working with us and partnering with us. And so it's fascinating. A lot of people say, hey, there's this dream company I want to work with. But I think that's the wrong question to ask. The question should be who's ready to work with you and really willing to move at speed and invest with you. And that's what makes a great partner, not necessarily the perfect company in terms of market position, because they may have no interest, and then you're going to waste years trying to get them to move.
Here's the last question. It can be fairly general, but if you mentioned in hindsight, I would have loved to have known this. Are there certain things, fundamentals, anything that comes to mind? It could be within any particular phase or process of building a business. Any advice out there for founders that you'd like to share?
My number one advice would be humble, learn, and pick your partners, co-founders, first customers carefully. We talked about this a little bit just now. It starts really with your co-founders, right? Getting that cultural fit, vision alignment, how you really see your roles changing, because your job's going to change completely from the 5-person company to the 100-person company to the 1,000-person company. And so both of you have to evolve and grow, and that may mean changing roles, changing titles, changing responsibilities. I think the same is true for your first hires. How do you make sure they align to your vision? In Nauto's case, we have really recruited people who are here for our mission. We're on a quest to eliminate collisions and all the injuries and damage they cause. And if you talk to our employees, that's what they get out of bed for in the morning. It has helped us build an incredibly collaborative culture where people care about each other, care about their well-being, because it kind of suffuses everything we do. We're here to save lives and not to, be jerks and make each other miserable, like you've seen some companies out there. And then it extends to which investors do you pick? I really strongly recommend founders not to just go for the highest valuation, the highest bidder. Pick investors that will be there for you in the tough times, because tough times will come. We've had customer loss setbacks. We've had a pandemic that nobody planned for. We had entire countries locked down and you couldn't travel there, couldn't install there. We had passenger fleets, who were a lot of our early customers, took a huge nosedive when the economy struggled. And we were saved because we had last mile package delivery, utility customers. They were booming during that time. And so really think about who are those partners and who are those investors that will be there for you. And I have nothing but great things to say about the investors we have who really stuck it out when the going got tough, and personally dug in, made introductions, provided additional capital. Because part of startup life is near-death experiences. As a small fledgling company, you're vulnerable, and you need friends who are willing to take a bet on you and stick it out. So
any shout out to like a VC that has stuck it out with you? For within the founder community, we always are giving advice on this investor did this or whatever. So for the positive case, anyone there that you like to share?
I'll give you two. I think it also varies a lot by stage. So in the early years, DNX and Playground, who are our Series A investors, were phenomenal. Okay. Playground has a deep technology bench, and they helped us get our first product out, helped us understand supply chain manufacturing. DNX was phenomenal in making introductions for us in Japan. It's part of the reason why, unlike most startups, we have an incredibly successful business in Japan. We're giant Japanese companies. It's very hard for American companies normally to do, but they helped us understand the local market. As we've grown, the one that really stands out is Greylock and Reid Hoffman, who has been a true friend and supporter through the darkest times of the pandemic. And also has incredible knowledge and access. They know more about enterprise sales and getting introductions to large companies that should look at this and care about safety, but may not know to go looking at startup technology. So we've had phenomenal positive experiences with all those investors.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And for your time.
If I may, Alejandro, I have one final suggestion. We didn't talk about that.
Please.
In the same vein. that I see most founders not taking advantage of, and I've been in roundtables where I'm the only one. I think most founders underestimate the power of treating their board as thought partners and as supporters and as active participants. If you're thinking of your board as a startup leader, as like this checkpoint, you got to pitch them and you have to, please them. I think you're thinking about your board the wrong way. We run a working board where all of our VCs, but also our independent board members are roll up your sleeves. They'll make calls for us. They'll make introductions. They'll show up at conferences with us, and they go deep with me on different real challenges we're dealing with. And the last piece of advice I have on that front is get yourself additional independent board members early. You asked me about VC shout outs, but the other person I would shout out to is we have Karen Francis on our board. She's a longtime GM and Ford Auto executive, ran her own startups. And she joined way back at Series A because I said, I want an independent board member and I want somebody who understands our end markets. Well beyond that, she's a phenomenal person with an incredible network. But those independents can be not only an additional champion, additional voice of support, but also, their only interest is the company's best interest. And so you have an extra pair of eyes and a shoulder to cry on in dark times. And
Oh, sorry, you're gonna say
yeah.
something.
So my advice really to founders is think about that board as an extra set of thought partners. And you have an ability, most founders don't realize, you have an ability to add to your board. All I did was go to our Series A investors and said, I'd like to add one independent board seat. And I'll run the list of candidates by you. I'm not going to pick somebody you hate. But they initially said, why do you need that? And I think they all became convinced that these independent board members add huge value in terms of their reach and expertise and advice.
How often how often are you interacting with your board? First of all, I think this is amazing that you bring this up because there's many of us that are already there. And how many, when you say, they roll up their sleeves and from introduction, so that can be very quickly, oh, here's an email, reach out to them. But what else? How often are you setting up these conversations?
So, the formal board meetings are the same as others, 4 times a year. We do a couple of unique things. One is we invite all of our strategic partners to what we call the Strategy Council, which is we do the same day as the board meeting, but a separate session. And we have both our partners and our board members participate in that. And we share things like what's on our roadmap, what are investments we're thinking about making. And so you get this phenomenal dialogue around strategic priorities. We also do working sessions with just our board members between board meetings. So we'll pick a topic and say, hey, we're looking at entering Europe, or we're looking at how to crack open this vertical. And we'll do a focused working session around that. And literally, we might sit around the room and say, okay, everybody open their Rolodex and their LinkedIn. And who do you know at these companies that we can have a dialogue with? Whether it's an introduction for a sale or just hey, we need to go have a conversation to understand their use cases and needs, whether they're even a fit or not. Talent recruiting, right? We've recruited a lot of phenomenal executives through networks that our board members and investors have. And so we actually share our performance reviews in aggregate with the board and the advisors and say, here's a gap we're trying to fill. Who do you know that could be a fit? And then I definitely do one-on-one conversations too, whenever I need, help or a favor or have an idea that I want to bounce off somebody. That's outside the board meeting. It's informal. It can be a quick email back and forth. Hey, I'm trying to find somebody who knows this, or it can be a lunch conversation. Again, it's all part of the mindset of the board's a partner. These are all human beings that want to help you, want to see you succeed. It's not a dog and pony show once a quarter where you're only and I start. This is another unique thing that our board really has given me feedback that they appreciate. I start every board meeting with the good, bad, and the ugly. Right. So here's what's going well. Here's things we're struggling with and what we're trying to achieve. And it kind of sets the right tone of These are things we're working on, and we want you to help us on these. And there's full transparency. We're not trying to only put the best foot forward or some of these things that you'll often hear from people. We're really trying to tell it like it is, because that way people can help more.
Stefan, this is incredible. This is gold, what you're sharing here. And I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And it's great you're building this community. So I look forward to, many, many future interactions helping each other. Great to meet you, Alejandro.
Take care.